Top 20 Pricing Analyst Interview Questions and Answers. A pricing analyst collects and analyzes sales and pricing data to improve a company's market share and profitability. Interviewers look for candidates who understand factors that drive market shares and those who can come up with useful strategies. The following questions should guide you if you are preparing for such an interview. 1. Why are you interested in this role? For many years, this has been one of the first questions in interviews. Your motives for applying for a given role can dictate whether you will land it or not. Tip number 1. You should have pure motives. Tip number 2. Your reasons should not be financially driven. Sample answer. I have always wanted to become a part of your company. I believe that I have what it takes to help you keep up to the standards you have achieved over the years. 2. What are the roles of a pricing analyst? The interviewer wants to know if you understand what is required from a pricing analyst in a place of work. Tip number 1. Outline all the essential roles of a pricing analyst. Tip number 2. You do not have to be wordy. The shorter the answers, the better. Sample answer. A pricing analyst collects and analyzes both sales and pricing data, improving a company's market share and profitability. Key: she assess market trends, draft analysis reports, and prepare the company's revenue forecast. 3. What are the qualities that a pricing analyst should have? The interviewer is trying to tell if you know the attributes of a pricing analyst. Keep in mind that these attributes will dictate whether you will make a good employee or not. Tip number 1. Mention the most important qualities. Tip number 2. You do not have to mention everything. Just a few. Sample answer. A pricing analyst should be an analytical thinker. She should be attentive and have a customer-centric attitude. A good pricing analyst should also solve complex problems that require her to prioritize. 4. What significant challenges did you face during your last role, and how did you handle them? Nobody wants to hire someone who cannot tackle problems that come along the way. By showing that you overcame particular challenges, the interviewer will be confident that you can rise to the occasion. Tip number 1. The experience should not sound forced or unreal. Tip number 2. Clearly outline how you handled the problem. Sample answer. During my last role, the company paired me with a team made up of feuding members. Since it was clear that their feuds were going to mess our operations, I convened a meeting where I encouraged them to solve their issues before we began working. We had a smooth time afterward. 5. Describe your daily routine as a pricing analyst. Certain occurrences happen in our places of work. It would be best if you showed the interviewer that you understand your place of work. Tip number 1. You should limit the activities to the place of work. Tip number 2. Do not overshare. Sample answer. My day much revolves around approving and denying quote requests as I deem fit. I generate reports and run loads of data onto a template before making updates. 6. Describe briefly about your experience. Every employer is looking for an experienced worker. Therefore, know how to go around this question. Tip number 1. Only talk of experiences that are relevant to the field. Tip number 2. This is a chance to sell yourself. Sample answer. Upon completing my studies, I joined Savvy Logistics and was paired with the chief pricing analyst. After 2 years, the chief pricing analyst moved out, and I saw an opening. I have been working with them for the last 5 years. I have managed to earn the Best Employee of the Year award thrice. 7. What kind of strategies and mindset is required for this role? Every job on the planet requires a given set of strategies and mindset. Nobody wants to employ a person who is not suited for a given job. Tip number 1. You should relate the mindset and strategies to the job. Tip number 2. Give a short and concise answer. Sample answer. Being a pricing analyst requires a person with a focused mindset. There are specific small details that can easily pass you. It would also help if you were a planner owing to the nature of the tasks at hand. 8. What is the biggest challenge that you foresee in the job? The interviewer will always assume that you have done your research regarding the job and company at large, meaning that you should be aware of some of the challenges you may face. Tip number 1. Your challenge should be reasonable. Do not come off as incompetent. Tip number 2. Only give one challenge. The interviewer may start doubting you. Sample answer. I appreciate this company's success over the years. However, I have realized that specific vital systems are not automated, which may cause problems in report generation. However, I believe that we can always find a way around this. 9. How do you keep motivated at work? We should not deny the fact that doing the same thing over and over can be nauseating. The interviewer would like to know what keeps you going. Tip number 1. Give a reason that sounds real. Tip number 2. Your drive should not be monetary. Sample answer. I always have goals for each day that I must meet before the end of the day. I always strive to reach those goals, and that keeps me going. 10. Describe a time that you failed in this role and some of the things that you learned. We all have our own set of failures in our professions. However, we are always shaped by the lessons we learn from them. Tip number 1. Do not throw yourself under the bus. Tip number 2. Think your answer through. Sample answer. During my first years, some of our team members failed to deliver, a move that saw the company lose massively. Even though I had done my part, I still felt like a failure. I learned that when pairing workers, one should check the strengths and abilities of each. 11. According to your understanding, what are the advantages of dynamic pricing tools? The interviewer is testing your knowledge and experience with dynamic pricing tools. Tip number 1. Show the interviewer that you understand what pricing tools offer. Tip number 2. Show that you are experienced. Sample answer. Dynamic pricing tools have several advantages. They increase sales, keep a business competitive, help businesses learn more about their customers, and even maximize profits. Such tools also keep you on top of your competitors. While used well, a business can minimize the disadvantageous sides. 12. How do you keep informed of prevailing market trends? Here, the interviewer wants to know if you stay abreast of market trends. This field requires you to be up to date. Tip number 1. Show the interviewer that you are up to date with market trends. Tip number 2. You should be informed. Sample answer. I have subscribed to several trade journals and magazines which informs me of the smallest of changes. I also network a lot and engage with my customers, which helps me learn from them. I also keep an eye on industry competitors and learn a few things from them. 13. Which intelligent business software do you recommend? Why? This is a simple question that aims to deduce your prowess in the business market. The interviewer wants to know if you will be an excellent addition to the company. Tip number 1. Recommend business intelligence software that has worked for your company. Tip number 2. Show the interviewer that you are handy. Sample answer. I love DataPean because it allows you to connect your data from several sources and analyze them with advanced analytic features. It serves both advanced and average business users, allowing them to create their queries and execute several actions. 14. What types of data do you analyze to determine competitor behavior? The interviewer wants to know if you are experienced in data analysis, which is an essential skill in an employee. Tip number 1. Show that you are experienced and knowledgeable in behavior analysis. Tip number 2. Be clear and precise. Sample answer. When doing competitor analysis, you start by identifying your competitors, obtaining information about them, including brand awareness, and evaluating their strategies. To be successful, you will need their financial data on profitability, market data, market share, distribution channels, and customer data. 15. Can you tell us about a given time that you achieved great success with a pricing strategy? You should handle this question carefully. The interviewer is assessing your experience and ability to increase market share and profitability. Therefore, if not tackled well, your answer can bar you from getting the position. Tip number 1. Your answer should be convincing. Tip number 2. Ensure that your reply does not come out as recited. Sample answer. I once made 3 times my company's target when I decided to price skim. The company was introducing new hair products in the industry, and therefore, I suggested that we set higher rates at the initial phase and lower them gradually. The strategy proved to be a huge success. 16. What have you found to be the best way to monitor the performance of your work? The interviewer wants to know how you assess yourself. Therefore, ensure that you go about this question tactfully. Tip number 1. Your mode of assessment should be highly effective. Tip number 2. Convince the interviewer. Sample answer. I usually have targets and goals before I begin a task. To know if I am on the right track, I mark my achievements against my targets. I change my tactics if I am not on the right track. 17. What is the key to developing a good team in your own opinion and experience? Every employer wants an employee who is a team builder. Therefore, ensure that your answer is constructive. Tip number 1. Mention some of the core components of successful team building. Tip number 2. Convince the interviewer that you are indeed a good team builder. Sample answer. When developing a good team, one should take into account the strengths and abilities of the different members. Also, you should ensure that all the members understand what is at hand. 18. Share an experience where you successfully shared a complicated piece of information. The interviewer is assessing your communication skills. Nobody wants an employee who cannot put across a simple piece of information. Tip number 1. You should show the interviewer that you are a good communicator. Tip number 2. Let your answer be free. It should not sound forced. Sample answer. I once worked with people who did not understand several English terms. I had to translate them to a language they understood before approaching them with any information. 19. Describe a time when you persuaded a person to change her own way of thinking. This is a common question that seems to assess your persuasiveness. Therefore, make sure that you meet its target. Tip number 1. You need to show the interviewer that you are persuasive. Tip number 2. Ensure that your experience is factual and not a fictional story. Sample answer. When I joined my former company, they were hell-bent on price skimming as a new pricing strategy. However, I managed to convince them that psychological pricing was best for their nature, which they listened to and considered. It became a massive success. 20. How do you organize, plan, and prioritize your work? Your organization skills are being put to the test. An employee who plans, organizes, and prioritizes their work well is a plus to a company. Tip number 1. You should keep the employer convinced. Tip number 2. Your answer should be short and straight. Sample answer. Every day before coming to work, I make a list of what is to be done. Once I get to work, I start with the most pressing. When prioritizing, I ensure that the ones that can be dealt with efficiently come first to give me ample time to focus on the more challenging tasks. Conclusion. You do not have to fumble during a pricing analyst interview. These 20 questions should guide you accordingly.